Hello, I'm Jen, and this is Literary Love 123. If you're new here, welcome to my channel. If you are returning, welcome back to my channel. I like to drink coffee, hex the patriarchy, and use my master's degree in English to discuss horror and occasionally other genres as well from an academic standpoint. But I also like to just have fun talking about the books that I love and hearing about the books that you love too. Today's video is going to be a January wrap up. I realized when I was putting this video together that I should have done a mid-month wrap up because I'm having trouble remembering the books I read at the beginning of the month. And as we all know, of course, January is 4 million, billion, trillion, thousand, hundred days long. So I'm going to do my very best to convey my thoughts to you and do this wrap up in a way that will tell you a little bit about how my January went. I'm going to go in order from my DNFs, then least favorite, all the way to my absolutely tip top favorites of January. I ended up DNFing two books in the month of January. The first book I DNF'd was the audio version of Where He Can't Find You by Darcy Coates. I got about 50% into the audio, and I definitely think that I am going to pick this back up in physical form because the audio narrator just did not work for me. The way that the narrator changed the voices to depict the different characters, there was just something about it that I found personally annoying. And again, this is just me. So I really feel like I need to give this story another chance. So, in this book, we are following a main character by the name of Abby. She lives in this small town where there has been, for several years, a murderer by the name of the Stitcher. And it's a really creepy premise because whenever they find his victims, their body parts have been sewn together with like other people's body parts with this red thread. And everyone in the town feels like they know who the Stitcher is, but they haven't been able to prosecute him. And I feel like I'm kind of rambling here. Like I said, this was at the beginning of the month, but the premise is really cool. And I really do think that it's worth a shot to pick it up again. It is YA, which is fine with me. But I just feel like, again, like I mentioned earlier, that there was just something that didn't quite gel for me with the narrator. The second book that I DNF'd in the month of January is Lure by Tim McGregor. This novella has only 116 pages, and I did make it to page 66 before I decided to go ahead and DNF. It really has a very promising premise in that it is about a mermaid who is captured by these terrible men in this remote village, and she ends up wreaking havoc on them and getting revenge on them for not only capturing her, but it also seems for the past horrible things that they have done to their wives who are no longer living. And I'm all in, right, for men getting what they deserve put back on them. So it was really a hard decision for me to DNF, but I just felt like I could not really get into the characters. I could not really get into the story. I just felt like there was something lacking for me in the way that the story was put together. I can't really think of exactly how I want to express that. And if you have finished this book, I would like to know if you enjoyed it and if you think that I should pick it back up and go ahead and finish it. Moving into my 3-star reads from January. The first 3-star I have is Children of Chicago by Cynthia Pelayo. This was my first time to read from Cynthia Pelayo, and I am definitely interested in reading from her again. So, what I really enjoyed about this book is the connection to fairy tales and the way that Pelayo was able to weave that into actual historical events and contemporary events taking place in Chicago. So, the premise of this book is that we have a detective, and her father has recently passed away, and he was the chief of police. So, she's kind of following in his footsteps. And murders began to take place in the city of Chicago. And the young people who are murdered, there seems to be a connection back to our main characters' younger years when her sister was also murdered. And the murderer goes by the name of the Pied Piper. So you can see how that relates to the fairy tale about the Pied Piper. And if you know the fairy tale, it's really very gruesome. You have the Pied Piper who comes to the village of Hamlin, and he says that he can play a tune that will cause all of the rats to follow him so he can rid the city of the rat problem. But then when he goes back to collect the payment that he was promised, the city refuses, or the village of Hamlin refuses to give him the money that he's due. So he gets back at them by playing a tune that causes all of the children to follow him, and then they disappear. So I think it's really interesting the way that Cynthia Pelayo takes that story and puts it into her own story to discuss some very real issues in the city of Chicago. There were also, excuse me, other numerous references to fairy tales, and I really enjoyed that. But I felt like some of it just wrapped up a little too abruptly. I felt like some parts of it went a little over the top, and I would have liked some more subtlety in certain parts. But overall, 3 stars is really good, and I really did enjoy this book. And just as a quick mention, too, if you're participating in Kat's Novel Adventures, her Folklore February, and I'll link her channel down below, this would make a choice that could go for example, monster is one of the prompts in Folklore February. And there's definitely a monster, or maybe more than one monstrous entity or person in this book. So the other 3-star read I have for the month of January is Starling House by Alex E. Harrow. And just look at this cover. It is absolutely stunning. This was a book of the month pick for me. And this story has been described as a mix of Southern Gothic, fairy tale, and fantasy. Now, I will be the first to say I am not a fantasy girly. I don't really care for a lot of fantasy. So I feel like I was probably not the target audience for this book. But the Southern Gothic aspect and the fairy tale aspect really pulled me in. You could kind of think of this story in some ways as a Beauty and the Beast, or even kind of a Cinderella retelling, or kind of a meshing of the two. So this could also go along with Folklore February on Kat's channel. For magic, could be one monster because it does have monsters in it. And I was really very much into the first half of the book, but then toward the second half, where I felt like it really delved more into that fantasy aspect, that's where it kind of lost me. But we're following Opal, who lives in a small town in Kentucky. And there's this mansion, the Starling House, that has long been surrounded by rumors. It's very mysterious. The people of the town are fearful of the residents there. So Arthur Starling is the current owner of the home. And through circumstances, the main character, Opal, ends up going to work for Arthur. And she really needs to make money. She is caregiving her, or the caregiver rather, of her younger brother Jasper, and she's trying to make sure that she has a way for him to be able to get into good schools and a good college. So she feels like it's her opportunity to make a good deal of money by going to work at the Starling House, even though the people of the town warn her against it. At the same time, for years, she's been dreaming of the Starling House. She feels this pull towards the house for some reason. And throughout the course of the story, you find out why she feels the pull to the house, what her connection to that house is, what exactly it is that the owners of Starling House have been protecting the other people in the town from. And it just goes into a lot that is really hard for me to convey. And I felt like by the end of the book, I started to kind of just skim through it really quickly, ready for it to end. But again, like I said, the beginning really had me pulled in. And I feel like if you are more of a fantasy reader, then you would really enjoy this book. So I did give it 3 stars, which is not bad. It is good, but that wasn't exactly for me. Moving on to my 4 star reads from the month of January. The first 4 star read I want to talk to you about is A Complex Accident of Life, Blackout Poetry inspired by Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And this is written by Jessica McHugh. So there are 52 poems in this collection that can be described as gothic and feminist. And I feel like the best way to really showcase this book is by showing you an artistic representation and then reading the poem, A Solitary Chamber. The complexity of creation formed in me a hurricane of life and death, a dark new species, happy to corrupt my spirits with the secret midnight nature. And I really absolutely loved this book. I love the way that Jessica McHugh could take one of my favorites, Frankenstein, and turn it into something of her own, and not only with words, but also with illustrations. The next 4 star read from January that I want to talk about is Eileen by Otessa Moshfegh. This was my first time to read from Otessa Moshfegh, so I really didn't know exactly what to expect going into it. I am thinking about how I can explain this book to you. It is, in my opinion, very reminiscent of Virginia Woolf's writing in the stream of consciousness way that this story is written. And Eileen is this kind of unlikable, just main character. She has a lot of things going on in her life. She's taking care of her father, who is an alcoholic. She works at a boys' prison, and she really feels very despondent, and she feels isolated and confined within her world. One day, a new prison counselor arrives by the name of Rebecca, and I think her name's Rebecca. Let me make sure. Yes. so, so Eileen kind of becomes infatuated with Rebecca and obsessed with the way Rebecca looks and dresses and the way that she sounds, and they kind of strike up a friendship. And Rebecca gets Eileen involved in this crime, and Eileen spirals a bit further out of control as a result of that. But she's telling the novel, or telling her story in this novel, from her perspective as an older woman looking back on her earlier life. And she manages to escape the confines of the small town, and it feels very rambly, which may be why I'm rambly. And I cannot even quite put my finger on why I liked it, but I did. So I'll definitely be picking up more by Otessa Moshfegh. And if you have read others by this author, I would love to know which one you think I should pick up next. And the last 4-star read from January that I want to talk to you about is Monstrilio by Gerardo Samano Cordova. And Monstrilio was one of the books on my 24 and 2024 list. So I'm happy to be able to say that I have gotten one of those books read, and there's another one coming up in a few minutes that I'll be talking about too. So, Monstrilio, we follow the story of a few different narrators. We get some shifting perspectives. We get perspectives from Magos, who is Santiago's mother. We get perspective from Joseph, who is Santiago's father. We get a perspective from Lena, who is a doctor and a friend of both Magos and Joseph. And then the final point of view we get is the point of view from Monstrilio. So you may be asking, who is Santiago? Who is Monstrilio? So this book opens up with the death of Santiago. He's the 11-year-old son of Joseph and Magos. And Magos has heard that if you take a piece of your deceased loved one and grow it through nurturing and feeding, that you can hold on to a piece of that person. And she chooses to remove a part of Santiago's lung. Well, the lung does indeed grow into something, not exactly a person. It grows into this thing that they end up calling Monstrilio. Now, I get that all this sounds wacky offhand like this, but what this book really does is to explore grief and loss and death. And I will say that the beginning of the book, where Santiago, the actual boy, dies, yes, it's sad, but I was moved to tears at the other parts of this book. I'm tearing up thinking about it now. Once Monstrilio, this thing, is created. And I want to share some quotes from this book that really spoke to me. And I think that in that you will get the sense of how profoundly and how much in depth this book explores grief and conveys it in such a real and tangible way. I'm sorry, I'm tearing up. So, at one point in the book, Magos thinks to herself, one believes the stupidest things in grief. And then at another part, she's expressing her frustration at the way her husband Joseph is handling, or in her opinion, not handling the death of their son. She describes him as withering away. And she says, to wither is not the same as to break. To break is to have pieces to put back together. And to wither is to dry up, to wilt, to lose bone, to die. And death is the most boring. I needed to see pieces, so I broke the vase. So at this point in the book, she is trying to get her husband to react in some way. As she writes, she feels like he's withering, but she wants to see him fall apart. So she takes a vase that had been a family heirloom of his and throws it and breaks it just in that emotional outburst. And I just felt like this was a very raw and realistic look at grief. And just one other quote I want to share with you, where she writes that it was exhausting to bear Joseph's sadness. And when you think about something as devastating as the loss of a child, and you think about how parents may deal with that differently, and how the way that they express grief instead of bringing them together can pull them apart. And we do see that happen in this novel. So you definitely want to make sure to check content and trigger warnings, because, like I said, some parts of it were very brutal and very raw. Now let's get into my 5-star reads from the month of January. The first 5-star book I want to talk to you about is The Folly by Gemma Amore. This author's full immersion was number 5 in my top 10 list of books I read in 2023. So I was excited to read another one of her books, and this did not disappoint. So in this book, we are following our main character whose father is recently released from prison. Now, he went to prison because he was accused of unaliving her mother. And she's always believed that he was innocent. So she did work toward getting him exonerated. So once he is released, they end up moving from the house that they had lived in previously, where the unaliving or accidental death took place. And they moved to an isolated folly on the Cornish coast. And over the course of their time there, the main character begins to wonder whether or not her father is actually innocent. At the same time, there is a very strange man who they keep encountering. He keeps bursting into their folly and invading their space, and he sounds like, dresses like, and behaves in the same way as the main character's mother. And over the course of the novel, you follow the main character as she deals with grief over the loss of her mother, as she's trying to come to terms with the relationship that she hopes to still be able to have with her father. And then you also have betrayal on the underside, and you have dark family secrets that come to the surface. So this book deals with grief, and it deals with family trauma, and it has been compared to Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca and Robert Eggers' The Lighthouse movie, and I can certainly see elements of both of those in this book. And I am really excited too on the subject of Gemma Amore, because I have pre-ordered a short story collection titled All Who Wander Are Lost. Something like that is the title anyway. And it is Gemma Amore's collection of stories where she kind of takes a different spin on J.R.R. Tolkien's Not All Who Wander Are Lost. So I'm really looking forward to getting into that. If you have read other books by Gemma Amore and you think I would enjoy them, let me know which other ones you think I should read. The next 5-star read that I want to talk to you about is Poor Things by Alistair Gray. As you can see, I annotated the hell out of this one. But I don't want to go into a lot of detail in this video because I am planning an upcoming video after I see the movie. I want to do a comparison between the book and the movie and get into a deep dive and a thorough discussion. So I'm going to put most of my thoughts on hold. But I will say that this book is described as a different kind of take on Frankenstein. And I can certainly see that because you have a character by the name of Godwin Baxter, who is a medical student or a doctor, and he is able to take this woman who has died, deliver her baby, and take the brain from the baby and put that into the head of the woman, therefore creating a grown woman in bodily form with the brain of a baby. And so that particular creation is named Bella. And you get to experience the world through Bella's eyes. And this has a lot of commentary on society, on misogyny, on politics. it really goes into all of that deeply. And initially, I had considered DNF in this book. And the opening, you get the perspective from a couple of males, but then the perspective shifts to Bella herself. And that's when I really, really got interested. And it really, really kept me invested the whole way through because it really skewers a lot of what we know today in the realm again of politics and economy, society, and the patriarchy. So I cannot wait to watch the movie and then be able to come back and do a deep dive into Poor Things. And the last 5-star read from January that I want to talk about is Jawbone by Monica Ojeda. So this story follows a student, a young woman who is kidnapped by her teacher, who is also a woman. And you're getting the backstories from both the student and the teacher. And this book really explores themes of femininity and what it means to be a little girl and the things that you fear as a little girl. And then it goes into things that you fear as a teenage girl, then as a young woman, and even themes of exploration in fears that you face as an older woman. This book also explores the darker side of mother daughter relationships, the conflicts that sometimes occur between women who are older versus women who are younger, looking at the ways that sometimes women feel pitted against each other and fearful of each other. And I really felt like this book highlights the struggles and the hardships that women face. And it deals both with psychological issues as well as with physical. And it's written in kind of a stream of consciousness, sort of fever dreamy kind of way that's hard to explain. So I know this book is probably not going to work for everyone, but if you like explorations into the monstrous side of femininity and the issues that we face as women, and you don't mind something being a little bit fever dreamy and a little bit weird, then I do recommend this book for you. Lastly, I participated in the Nevermore Readathon that was hosted by Kat at Kat's Novel Adventures. And this readathon took place from January 19th, which is Poe's birthday, to January 25th. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here because I do have 2 vlogs as well as a live show that I joined Kat for to discuss The Black Cat and The Telltale Heart. So if you want to know my thoughts on this Poe book with scholarly essays, and if you want to know my thoughts on a couple of Poe's detective stories, as well as my thoughts on my rereading of The Black Cat and The Telltale Heart, then you can watch that live show or catch up on the vlogs, and I will link all of them, including Kat's channel, down in the description box below. So I want to thank you so much for watching, and I want to know, what is your favorite book that you read in the month of January? Also, don't forget, if you have other recommendations by Gemma Amore, I want to hear about those. And if you think I should give Lure by Tim McGregor another chance, let me know that too. And once again, I want to thank you for watching. Hit the like button and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.